This information is current as of July 27, 2020. For all queries, we ask that you consult our frequently asked questions (FAQs) and you contact us using our Contact Us form. United Arab Emirates. What international travel measures have been announced by the UAE? The UAE government and the government of Dubai have announced new international travel protocols that apply to citizens and residents. We advise those planning to leave the UAE to consult official published guidelines and to clarify requirements for travel with your airline or travel provider. Residents returning to the UAE are advised to consult the published guidelines for the UAE and for Dubai and to contact your airline or travel provider to check their requirements. How can UAE residents abroad return to the UAE? UAE residents abroad who wish to return to the UAE must obtain permission from the UAE authorities. Applications for approval should be made through the UAE Residence Entry Permission Service. For the 22nd of June, there is a separate process for Dubai residents which is outlined below. An application to return can be made on the Federal Authority for Identity and Citizenship website (ICA). The ICA advises passengers to wait for approval before booking flights, and that those who receive approval should enter the UAE within 21 days. Once approval is received, flights bookings can be made with Etihad, Emirates, or other carriers. The granting of permission to return to the UAE is at the discretion of the UAE immigration authorities. Helplines have been established by the ICA by telephone on 0097123128867 and 0097123128865. The ICA can be contacted by email on operation@ica.gov. Requirement for COVID testing prior to travel. On the 23rd of July, the UAE authorities announced new requirements for COVID-19 testing prior to travel to the UAE from all countries. https://covid19 ncma.gov. N News Details 1393. All passengers flying to the UAE, including transit passengers, will be asked at check-in to produce a negative result from a COVID-19 test conducted in the previous 96 hours at an accredited laboratory. https://screening. Per Health application. The Embassy is in contact with the UAE authorities regarding the implementation of these new requirements. Requirements for COVID testing should be confirmed with your airline prior to travel. Additional information is available on Etihad Travel Updates and Emirates Travel Updates. Dubai residents. The government of Dubai has published new travel guidelines for Dubai. Holders of Dubai residency visas must obtain permission to return to Dubai from the General Directorate of Residency and Foreigners Affairs. Permission can be obtained through the airline or by applying directly to the General Directorate of Residency and Foreign Affairs (GDRFA). This link is only accessible outside the UAE. Further information about how to book a flight is available on the Emirates Airline website. Any queries on approval to return to Dubai should be directed to the airline or travel provider, or to the GDRFA. What restrictions have been put in place by the government in the United Arab Emirates? The Abu Dhabi government announced a ban on entering and exiting the Emirate and traveling between its regions Abu Dhabi, Al Ain and Al Dhafra from June 2nd. Travel between the regions of Abu Dhabi is permitted from the 22nd of June. From the 30th of June, the Abu Dhabi government announced that entry to the Emirate will be granted to those able to demonstrate receipt of a negative COVID-19 test result within the previous 48 hours. Rapid coronavirus testing is available at the border between Abu Dhabi and Dubai for a fee of 50 dirhams. It is necessary to pre-book your appointment in advance. It is mandatory to wear face masks in public and to adhere to social distancing measures. You should monitor local media and comply with the directions of local authorities. What flights are in place to leave the UAE? The UAE Airlines are operating flights to Dublin, London Heathrow and other European hubs. Emirates will operate direct flights from Dubai to Dublin from the 15th of June. Etihad will operate 3 direct flights per week from Abu Dhabi to Dublin. KLM operate daily flights to Amsterdam with connections to Dublin. Air France operate 3 flights weekly to Paris with connections to Dublin. These commercial flights can be booked on the airline websites by calling their call centers or through a travel agent. If you are transients through the UK and either staying airside i.e. aren't passing through immigration control or traveling to a different airport to get an onward flight connection to Ireland, you must fill out a UK passenger locator form in advance of travel. You should be aware of the possibility of flight changes or cancellations and should contact the airline to confirm travel details. If traveling to Ireland via another country, you should confirm transit rules with your airline, and you should have an onward flight booking to Ireland before seeking to board a flight in the UAE, as boarding may be denied otherwise. If you are traveling to Ireland and plan to transit Paris or Brussels, please inform us by completing our Contact Us form, as specific transit rules may apply. What documents do I need to travel to the airport? From the 30th of June, the Abu Dhabi government announced that entry to the Emirate will be granted to those able to demonstrate receipt of a negative COVID-19 test result within the previous 48 hours. Rapid coronavirus testing is available at the border between Abu Dhabi and Dubai for a fee of 50 dirhams. It is necessary to pre-book your appointment in advance. Passports and flight booking confirmation should be produced if requested by officials to travel to the airport. What requirements are in place for those traveling to Ireland? A negative COVID-19 test is not required to enter Ireland. However, you should check your airline requirements prior to traveling. The Irish health authorities require anyone coming into Ireland, apart from Northern Ireland and those countries on the green list see below, published on July 21, to restrict their movements for 14 days. This includes Irish citizens coming home, people with no symptoms, people who have tested negative for the virus in another country. Restricting your movements means staying indoors in one location and avoiding contact with other people and social situations as much as possible. To ensure that this is being observed, all passengers arriving to Ireland from overseas are obliged to complete a public health passenger locator form and to submit it to the relevant authority at their port of entry. Exemptions are in place for providers of essential supply chain services such as hauliers, pilots, and maritime staff. Check the Irish Government Advice page for full information on these requirements. Further advice for people who have recently returned from abroad is available from the HSE. The government has published a green list of countries whereby the status of travel advice to which non-essential travel can resume be changed to normal precautions status. Individuals arriving in Ireland from these locations will also not be required to restrict their movements on arrival. The UAE, Qatar and Kuwait are not included. The list and related travel advice will be subject to ongoing review. What measures are in place for those returning to the UAE? Permission is required for residents returning to the UAE. See how can UAE residents abroad return to the UAE. Above. Passengers arriving in the UAE will be required to go through thermal screening and may be tested for COVID-19. There will be a mandatory quarantine period of up to 14 days at home or in a designated facility. You should follow the directions of the local authorities. Dubai residents. Residents returning to Dubai should adhere to the new guidelines on traveling to Dubai from the 23rd of June and the travel requirements on the Emirates airline website. Can I transit through the UAE? The UAE government has announced the resumption of some transfer services between Europe, Australia and Asia through the UAE. Please see Emirates and Etihad websites or contact your travel provider for further information. Can I visit the UAE? The Irish government is advising all Irish citizens against non-essential foreign travel. Anyone returning to Ireland, except from Northern Ireland, will be required to self-isolate for 14 days upon arrival. Entry to the UAE is currently only permitted for UAE citizens and residency visa holders who have received permission from the authorities to return to the UAE. Visitors to Dubai. The government of Dubai has announced that visitors can travel to Dubai from the 7th of July. Information as to what visitors need to do before they travel and what will happen on arrival in Dubai is available on the Visit Dubai website. I am an Irish citizen and I need to update or change my UAE visa status. Can I do this? The UAE Federal Authority for Identity and Citizenship announced on the 13th of April that visas and entry permits that expired after the 1st of March 2020 would be valid until the end of December 2020. This decision will be revoked from the 12th of July 2020, applicable to entry permits, residency visas and ID cards. Administrative fees and fines will be applied to all services provided by the ICA from the 12th of July with the following exceptions. For residents outside the UAE who have spent less than 6 months outside the country, will be given a grace period of 1 month to renew their documents from the date of entering the UAE. For residents outside the UAE who have spent more than 6 months abroad or their residency visa expired as of March 1st will be granted a grace period to return to the UAE effective from the date of the opening of airspace between the two countries. For residents inside the UAE will be granted a grace period of 3 months to renew their documents. If your visa has been cancelled, you will need to leave the UAE within 30 days or change the status of your visa to remain in the country legally. Irish citizens currently in the UAE on expired visit visa should seek to update their status in the UAE. If you have questions on the validity or expiry of your visa, or on change of visa status e.g. from a resident visa to a visit visa, you should contact UAE Immigration, see the ICA or GDRFA websites.